Our next speaker, of course, is from this university, Professor Marc Gopin, Rabbi Marc Gopin, who is Professor of Conflict and Conflict Resolution here, a good friend of the Iranian-American community. We have had very fruitful collaboration in the past. Delighted to have you here and to collaborate with you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming. I know many of you from before, and I just want to give a certain perspective on this before we move on with the program. I want to go a little bit more deeply into this whole question of the present versus the past, and the question of this of Cyrus, and the question of manhood, really. I think it's in many ways my training is actually in philosophy, and also my main practice is in war prevention and conflict resolution. So in many ways I have no patience for history anymore. I'm not interested in things from 2,000 years ago, and yet only if it's instructive, only if it's something that has deep relevance. And I think it is interesting that in the Iranian community, there's something from 2,500 years ago that keeps coming up and coming up and coming up. And in the Jewish community, it's the temple from 2,000 years ago. From 2,000 years ago, what happened to the 2,000 years of temples? I mean, it's a little bit slow on on having something glorious. This idea of going back 2,000 years in each community to something glorious is a little bit interesting. There's a kind of implicit trouble with the last 2,000 years. And I think that that's something that we should think about in terms of how communities help each other and face each other's challenges and learn from each other and honor each other at the same time in all of their glorious imperfections. And it is gloriously imperfect to have to go back 2,000 years to communities to see glorious times. But I want to get to this figure. I personally, as an outsider to the Iranian community, am fascinated by a man who can be loved by Machiavelli and Thomas Jefferson at the same time. That's really a feat. And then not to mention the Shah and Ahmadinejad at the same time. And if that's not enough, you go to the museum and they have a big quote from Ben Gurion. Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, anybody who can have Jefferson, Machiavelli, and Ben Gurion and Ahmadinejad all admiring them must have done something right as a man. He must have had something about him that's, because most of us, especially in peace work, are kind of reviled. I mean, we do controversial work. We actually think people should love each other rather than kill each other. And, you have a lot of enemies. And here's this guy. He's a warrior. He conquers half the world. And it's unbelievable what happens to him in Jewish literature, particularly in biblical literature. And I want to go into that because it is a question of what it is to be a man. So much of warfare that we understand today as conflict analysis is what is it to be a man. The history of warfare, it continues in civilization, and one of the remarkable things in the last 50 to 100 years is that because of various changes in human history, there's far, far more women's empowerment that has been called the feminization of power. And as that power goes up, warfare has tended to go down, especially in the last 50 years. And there's a direct correlation. And it's one of the reasons why we do work in international development and in conflict, in the empowerment of women, mothers, children, professionals, not only in education, but in policing and many other things, because there's a direct correlation. And so it really is a matter of what is a man. Because Koresh as a man was very different than Nebuchadnezzar as a man. And King David as a man. And half the kings in the Bible as a man. And in fact, it's very hard to be a man in Jewish life, by the way, because from the Bible on, men have a heck of a time. It's not just that Jewish women make sure to put them in their place. It's that the Bible itself is like no leader escapes severe criticism. And this is part of the problem in Jewish-Muslim dialogue, by the way, because in Jewish traditional rabbinic life, it's actually a mitzvah to find a sin with everyone, with everybody. You cannot be a perfect man. So Moses had a sin, and Aaron had a sin. There are whole sections of the Talmud that try to find what was Moses' sin. Then you get into dialogue, in Muslim-Jewish dialogue, and you talk about each prophet and what was wrong with them, and people go, oh my God, you can't say that about the prophets. But in Jewish life, you do. And you really cut down. You really cut down. So the book of Kings is a book of reviling the kings. One king after another. This king reigned for 50 years. He didn't do anything but idolatry. And he died. And then it moves on to the next king. And it's a bit of an exaggeration, but really even King David and King Solomon, the foundations of all the glorious things in the Bible itself, not in later literature, are subject to severe criticism. There's only one exception, and this is really strange, but it is Koresh. Cyrus. Cyrus comes in for praise in the book of Ezra and in the book of Isaiah in a way that no one else does. And this is not Torah. I'm not saying this to be nice to an Iranian audience, okay? I'm saying this literally from a biblical fact. And it's very strange. It's so extraordinary because by the way, he's a servant of the people. But he's a servant, a messenger of God, right? But that's not such a nice term because Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, was also a messenger. And the prophets are very clear. You're a messenger. You're punishing the Jewish people right now because they deserve it. But you're going to get yours too, very soon. And that was the biblical prophecy about Nebuchadnezzar as a messenger of God. But Koresh is seen as the model of what is possible in messianic, prophetic leadership of humanity. He is seen as the salvation of humanity, not just the Jewish people. And it is that foundation, if you look carefully in the literature of the book of Isaiah, the book of Isaiah is not only important to Judaism, it's critical to Christianity. Because it is the basis for the concept of a Messiah that can redeem history. And redeem history not in some mystical, otherworldly sense. Not nice poetry. Not God bless them, the Jewish mystics or Rumi or others. But this is the idea that God can enter into history and make politics better. Make the relationship between rich and poor better. Make justice a functional part of politics. All of that came from the idea that Koresh actually did it. Not for the Jewish people, but for everyone. The idea, and again, I can't test what's in the cylinder. I studied the cylinder when I was there, and I realized it doesn't say the Jews, and there are some problematic elements, but the biblical literature is unmistakable. That this is an absolute answer to the concept of hope in history. The linearity that there is the possibility of political and prophetic hope that politics can change for the better. That all comes from this non-Jewish king called Cyrus. And that becomes the basis of the Christian concept of Messiah and the Muslim concept of Mahdi in history. If the Jews had not come up with that idea of an ideal Messiah, and then the working of that in Christianity, and then the working of that in Islamic theology. So this is big in Western history. And whether or not Cyrus matched up to that in person, that's a separate question. The point is that what was given birth to was the idea that the world could change for the better, not just mystically, not just magically, but politically, in terms of justice, in terms of people being able to worship as they see fit. Now, he didn't give birth to human rights, but human rights is the structural solution to moving beyond kings who happen to be nice. In other words, the human rights agenda of the last 500 years, starting with Grotius and even the Magna Carta, was to say it's great to, thank God, have a king that's sane once in a while, let alone nice. Right? I mean, they got really tired of insane kings in Europe, and they said, okay, let's not wait for a benevolent one who's always going to have a mad son. Let's think about how to institutionalize our safety and security. And they start out with the nobles, they start out with the men, eventually we get to the women, eventually we get to homosexuals, and before you knew it, you have universal human rights. Universal human rights is the instantiation of that dream that I believe Cyrus had, and especially as it's instantiated in the biblical books of the Torah. So I want to say also, on that basis, a kind of there's 25,000 Jews to this day in Iraq. It's the biggest community of Jews in the Middle East that's still there, whatever regime is in place, no matter how extreme, no matter how strange, no matter how strange a president is. There's 25,000 people there. They haven't been kicked out. And that's very unusual in Jewish history. We're used to moving a lot. Okay, every 100 years in Europe, you had absolutely no right to live anywhere. You were used for usury. You lent and borrowed for the church. And when the peasants got sick and tired of you, the church said you were Satan, and boom, you were kicked out. First England, then France, then Germany. And my ancestors, my name, Gopin, actually comes from England, and then France, and then Germany, and finally Ukraine. And where my grandparents come in Ukraine, there's absolutely nothing left, except a mass grave from the Holocaust. That's it. That's it for Jewish culture. So I want to say to the Iranian people, Mamnun. Thank you. Because despite all of the problematic aspects of Iranian leadership in history, the fact is that there's some remnant that was saved in the cultural pluralism that has allowed for an exceptionalism to this tiny little minority that now happens to have a state and 400 nuclear weapons and has other set of problems, but a people that for 2,000 years have been very, very vulnerable. And it can only come to Mamnun. And the key in our religious literature and wisdom literature is that the key to salvation and transformation of relationship is repentance, apology, forgiveness, and gratitude. These are the major elements of spiritual traditions, which the Iranian state and the Jewish state could use a big dose of. Let's face it, in terms of repentance, apology for the past, forgiveness, and gratitude. And we are trying to infuse this city with a little bit more of that spirit, based on very pragmatic arguments, very political arguments, but in essence, that spirit. And the day will come when the New York Times, when they say, experts say war is inevitable, it won't be just one think tank in town that's always the expert. It may actually be experts in the capacity to build peace between civilizations who also become the experts for the New York Times and the Washington Post. And that's kind of what we're looking forward to. So again, thank you for coming, and happy Passover and happy New Year.